Hey, what's going on, guys? Conor McGregor did another interview to promote his upcoming movie Roadhouse, and you can tell that Conor McGregor is becoming increasingly more frustrated with the UFC, even brought up something that Dana White said publicly that he's not happy with. On top of that, he talked about opponents. And if I'm Michael Chandler watching this interview, which you know Michael Chandler watches every single Conor McGregor interview, he has one dude on his mind, and they do briefly touch on Chandler in this interview. But if I was Michael Chandler and I watched this, I'm lighting a cigarette, I'm popping in a Creed CD because I would be 6 foot from the edge after watching this interview. And it's the most telling Conor McGregor interview to date about the situation going on behind the scenes between him and the UFC. And we're going to take a look at that in this video. We're going to take a look at Coach John Kavanagh was asked about Conor McGregor potentially being iced by the UFC from Ariel Helwani. And also, we're going to take a look at the clip of what Dana White recently said publicly that Conor McGregor said in this upcoming interview, or this recently released interview, that Conor McGregor said that he's not happy that Dana White said this publicly. And I truly believe, and we're going to talk about this more towards the end of the video, I truly believe this Conor McGregor UFC Dana White situation is starting to reach a boiling point. And I think soon enough, it might be a week from now, it might be a month from now, it might be a couple months from now, I think there might reach a point of no return between Dana White, the UFC, and Conor McGregor. But we'll discuss that later in the video. Let's start right away with the clip from the MMA Hour. By the way, all the clips that I show in this video, I will link down in the description. Also, I did a video a couple days ago where we looked at multiple clips from Conor McGregor and some telling things that he said about the UFC and other promotional interviews. If you have not seen that video yet, I will link it down in the description. Go check that out first for more context before this video, but you don't absolutely have to see that video first. Let's start off right away with Coach Kavanagh on the MMA Hour. And Ariel Helwani, you can really see him trying to get an answer, trying to get a reaction out of John Kavanagh. He doesn't get much. He gets a little bit, but he doesn't get much. And he directly brings up the UFC icing Conor McGregor, and it's something that I've been talking about for a while. And it just seems like nobody's covering it. And I think because there's not 100% undeniable evidence of it, just because of that, I feel like maybe the media is not talking about it that much. There's also media that is scared to step on Dana White and the UFC's toes. So I feel like this is a topic that's been avoided so much by MMA media. And Ariel brings it up to John Kavanagh while he has him in studio. Let's listen to what Ariel has to say, and then you'll hear kind of John Kavanagh's response, which I think is very telling.
Can I just say it's one of the, to me, I'm not putting words in your mouth. This is me, Ariel, saying it. I think it's a travesty what is happening. I think that he's being iced out, and I love to see Nate speak on his behalf. I don't know if you saw his tweet. How about that?
Yeah. By the way, Nate Diaz put out a tweet. I'll put it up on the screen, but basically saying free Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor reposted this and says 100%. He reposted it on his Instagram story. I don't know if I have that screenshot. If I do, I'll put it in the video. But essentially, the MMA Hour put out a quote from Conor. They posted it on Instagram. Nate reposted it. I'll post that on the screen. And basically said, free Conor McGregor. This is what they were doing to me. Because if you guys didn't know, a couple years ago, essentially the UFC was icing Nate Diaz because he was trying to fight out his contract. And that's why they booked Nate Diaz versus Khamzat Chimaev. Nate Diaz refused to re-sign a long-term deal. The UFC wasn't happy with it. So they said, you know what? We're going to give you the worst possible opponent for your last opponent. And now Nate Diaz is sticking up for Conor McGregor. But let's listen to what the rest of what Ariel has to say and what Coach Kavanagh has to say.
Nate saying free Conor. And I know there's more to it, and I know he has a lot going on. But to me, comparing it to the world of boxing, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury don't say, I hope I get the call. He needs to be shown greater respect. He decides. If there's no 302, 301, 303 on that date, make a number. Make a show for him. He has done so much for this sport. It blows my mind. I see him. I saw the interview today with Talk Sport, and it's like I could feel.
He's referencing the interview that we're going to look at in a little bit right after this video. You can tell that Conor in this upcoming interview, or this recently released interview, you can tell Conor's more frustrated. Ariel picked up on that as well.
The frustration. I know he's being a company guy, and he's very fond of the UFC, but like, the greatest of all time, the biggest draw, the biggest star, shouldn't be treated this way. This is me.
I don't know if he's calling Conor the greatest of all time. If he is, that's crazy. But I think he's saying, who is the greatest of all time or someone who's a big draw shouldn't be treated this way, is essentially what Ariel's saying. I don't know if he's calling Conor the greatest of all time. That's crazy if he said that.
You could agree or disagree, but it gets me mad to see that because I think he deserves much better than that. And I say this with him not even coming on my show while in New York City. That's me keeping it real.
It is.
Agree, disagree.
It's just a blueberry.
So you can see, and I know a lot of people hate on Ariel, and they're like, oh man, he's such a, he asks these little probing questions. That's what makes his show so popular. And this was his way of beating around the bush and not saying to John Kavanagh, oh, do you know if the UFC's icing Conor? Is that what's going on here? And kind of giving him a way to answer without actually answering. And that's exactly what John Kavanagh does here.
Berries Day.
Yeah.
Look, I won't pretend to know the politics and what's going on with legal stuff in the background. All I know is, like, it seems odd that we're not getting more. But like I said,
you can see Kavanagh's kind of beating around the bush here because he doesn't want to get Conor in trouble. He doesn't want to stir up shit with the UFC.
really am speaking from a position of ignorance because I actually tried to purposely avoid all that.
No, it makes sense.
Audie and the team, they do all that and they go back forward with Hunter and the UFC team. But yeah, it's weird to me that for someone to be the star he is and not get more opportunities.
He should have fought at 300.
So there you go. It's weird for someone to be the star that they are and not get more opportunities. Essentially, what's going on? Because Conor's been demanding a fight. USADA's out of the way. It's now 2024, almost the end of March of 2024. Where's the time going, by the way? And we still don't have a date for Conor McGregor's return. It's coming up. It's creeping up on 3 years since Conor McGregor broke his leg at UFC 264. And he's been begging for a return date for basically over 6 months. He's been announced to essentially return since February of 2023 when they announced The Ultimate Fighter against Michael Chandler. So there you hear Coach Kavanagh say essentially, it's very weird, it's very bizarre, but you can tell he's beating around the bush. And he's saying, look, I truly don't know what's going on, but it's just the fact that he doesn't want to step on anybody's toes. Now here's the Talk Sports interview or Talk Sport interview. Apparently this is a new channel, I guess, because they started a channel just solely based on MMA. And this was one of their first interviews. I will link this video down in the description if you want to go check it out and subscribe to their channel and support their channel. Because this was one of the most telling Conor McGregor interviews. He touches on, opponents. He touches on what's going on with his contract. And he touches on the future as well. And I just think it's super telling. Let's listen to this. They ask him directly. The majority of this interview was talking about the movie, or about half of it was talking about the movie. It was a very short interview. But this is right where he gets into asking him about when are you going to be fighting, basically. Listen to this.
The next step then, I anticipate, is getting back in that octagon.
Yeah, like I said, I have 2 fights left on my UFC contract. We're still in the first quarter of 2024. I've got this workload on me right now because I've got the promotion of the movie. I've got St. Patrick's festivities with the alcohol. After that, it's a closed door.
So there you go. He again mentions the fact that he has 2 fights left on his deal. The UFC doesn't like when prominent fighters attempt to fight out their deals. This is the identical situation to what happened with Francis Ngannou, but a much bigger star in terms of overall star power in Conor McGregor. But Francis was a champion. They didn't want to let him fight out his deal. Nate Diaz was a prominent fighter, was a decent draw. They didn't want to let him fight out his deal. Now Conor's trying to fight out his deal and even hints at the future after fighting out those 2 fights. And he even makes it seem like he isn't open to signing a contract extension. That's a bit of a reach, but you'll hear it here in a second. Listen to this.
So I get to go in and close the door and, map my plan. And then gym home. And I hope I get some clarity with a date and I can push towards it. I'm sure we will get something in by year end. Yeah.
Imagine you're Michael Chandler. You said you were leaving your family in a couple weeks on January 4th. And you hear Conor McGregor in an interview that was released on March 18th. And he said, yeah, I'm hoping to get a fight in by year's end. And also, it just seems like Conor, we talk about Alexander Volkanovski and his mental health and wanting to have a fight to focus on. It almost seems like that might be what's going on with Conor. People talk about potential drug use. People talk about him being an alcoholic or drinking too much. I wonder if Conor desperately wants a fight on the books because it helps him escape from that trap of drinking and potentially using drugs and doing things and partying overall, where he'd rather be focused on an upcoming fight. But because of the contract situation, he now is kind of being iced out and being forced to kind of not have a fight. And then instead he's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to drink and I'm going to do drugs or whatever else he may be doing. But listen to the rest of this.
You know, that's what I'm hoping.
You flirted in the past with International Fight Week, which is the end of June.
Mm-hmm.
Is that realistic for
Yeah,
you?
for sure. I would like that. I would love that. If they give me that and then we can go ahead and straight away, you know, for sure.
That Sphere in Las Vegas looks good as well, doesn't it? To maybe, the big ball that they've created there. Oh,
yeah.
mate.
You did call for that also. That would be great for me. June 29th and then the Sphere.
This is what he said before. He wants June 29th in the Sphere. Dana White says that's not happening. He said no to both of them, essentially. But listen to what Conor says. Well, listen, and this may be one of those things we look back on, and this may be the tipping point of negotiations between Conor McGregor and Dana White and the UFC going public. Listen to this.
And then, you know, then what? Then what happens then? I don't know. And I'm sure, I wonder, do they know? There's been no talk about like anything, you know, so I wonder what next.
I wonder what next. So he's saying International Fight Week, then the Sphere. I wonder what's next. It seems to me that he's dead set on fighting out this deal. And he says there's been no talks about what's going on next. That is what I want. The Sphere and also International Fight Week. Obviously, International Fight Week first. And he comes back to the Sphere here in a second. And that's what I was talking about, maybe the tipping point in negotiations. Listen to this. I think he talks about opponents next, but then he gets back to the Sphere.
What about opponents? Who do you want to fight?
It's good to see Poirier get that win the weekend. That makes this the quadrilogy, and you know, we'll say the real trilogy, the finish of it, to put an end to it, to put a finish to it.
So the first name out of his mouth is Dustin Poirier. Imagine you're Michael Chandler here. They asked Conor about the next opponent, and the first person he mentions is Dustin Poirier. Oh, we got to put an end to the real trilogy. I got injured last time, even though he was getting 10-8'd. So imagine that. And then the second opponent he mentions is not Michael Chandler either. By the way, guys, if you enjoyed these videos, do me a favor and make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications and like the video. I would greatly appreciate it, and share it as well. Listen to the next opponent he mentions.
That is a huge bout right now. So I anticipated the result would go that way, and I was happy to see it. And that's a big one for sure. Obviously, I've got the Diaz trilogy. That's what I had said for the Sphere. You know, there was cold water put on that publicly off the bat, and I wasn't happy with that. So
There was cold water thrown on that publicly, and I was not happy with that. Let's rewind back to UFC 299 post-fight, Dana White post-fight press conference. He's asked about Conor McGregor at the Sphere, Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor at the Sphere, and listen to what Dana has to say.
Last one from me. Conor McGregor says he still wants to fight in June, and he also mentioned he wanted to fight Nate Diaz in the Sphere on Mexican Independence Day. Do either of those two interest you?
I'm looking for Mexicans at the Sphere on Mexican Independence Day.
Nate?
Huh?
Nate Diaz.
Oh, okay.
Let me take a drink out of my Power Slap cup. I know this is probably going to be a highly viewed clip. You're asking me about Conor McGregor, but he's asked Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz at the Sphere. And he says, I'm looking for Mexicans. Well, Nate Diaz has Hispanic descent. Dana takes a drink out of his Power Slap cup, and then let's see what he has to say.
Yeah, no, I'm not doing that fight.
Yeah, I'm not doing that fight. Immediately dismissed it. And I get it. Okay, he has other plans, whatever. But you can see Conor McGregor not happy that Dana White went out there and immediately just doused cold water on the potential idea of Conor McGregor fighting at the Sphere. He did not like that. He said, I was not happy with it. And we're going to talk more about some back and forth between Conor and Dana White, potentially going more public very, very soon.
Not that, I mean, I need discussion or conversation, because you know, if I lose interest, if I'm not getting anything back, and I just drift off, my man. So I hope I can get something in and get dialed in.
What's the noise with Chandler? Because
So there you go. He says, I just want to get dialed in. I really truly believe Conor's kind of having one of those moments like Volkanovski talked about. I want to be focused on a fight, because if I'm not focused on a fight, I'm doing this, I'm drinking every night, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember exactly what Volk said, but he was talking about drinking. I think Conor wants desperately a fight to focus on, to potentially get his life back on track and not being out partying 24/7. And Dana White and the UFC are keeping him from a fight because he will not sign a long-term deal. And now the interviewer specifically brings up Michael Chandler. So Conor was asked about opponents. He talked about fighting for a couple minutes. He never mentioned Michael Chandler. And now finally the interviewer brings it up. And at least Chandler can probably breathe a sigh of relief listening to Conor's response.
Because obviously you did tough.
Chandler, of course. Yeah, that's it. I would assume that would be the first one.
Yep.
I would assume that would be the first one. Maybe.
So there you go. I would assume Chandler would be the first one. But he kind of walks that back a little bit here in a second. So we'll see.
Maybe Makhachev and Poirier fight for the title in July. You know, I don't think Poirier will be ready. He said something about ribs or something like that.
I don't know exactly what he's saying here. When he's saying Poirier won't be ready for Makhachev, or Poirier wouldn't be ready for him in June. I wonder if that's what he's saying. I don't know. It's hard to interpret that. I'm thinking maybe he's saying that Poirier wouldn't be ready to fight Conor in June, and instead Poirier would fight potentially for the title in July, but Conor wants to fight in June. But I'm not 100% sure on that. That's really up for interpretation.
And then there was a bit going on the head and whatnot after the bell. Maybe some reflection after he got knocked. It was a bad knockout he suffered in that fight against Gaethje.
And again, this just points to the fact that Conor's having mental struggles being out of the cage, and he wants to get back in the cage, and he's hoping that it'll, help him get back on track. He's talking about Dustin, who recently opened up about mental health regarding fighting in general. And after that loss to Gaethje, he was in a bad spot. And it seems like Conor, he's kind of attached himself to that a little bit.
And so you just don't know where anyone's at really mentally or whatnot. But again, I'll revert back to this. That's because that just happened the weekend. That's why it's recently in my head and when I'm speaking on it. It's the opponent doesn't matter. I just wish for a nice run up, a bit of transparency, and let me go over it again.
You can hear, and that's it from Conor. He wants transparency. He wants a bit of a run up. I'm assuming that's his way of saying, I don't want to do this short notice. I want a decent, I want a date. I want to be able to look forward to that date a couple months out, 3-4 months out. It's getting close to June. That's crazy to even say. We're 3 months out, essentially, from that June 29th date that Conor McGregor wants. So he seems like he's becoming increasingly more frustrated with Dana White and the UFC. He doesn't like that Dana immediately publicly just crapped on the idea of him versus Nate Diaz at the Sphere. And it just seems like he's like, I'm not hearing anything from the UFC. I don't know. I'm going to have those 2 fights, and then I don't know what's next. I don't know if they know what's next. So it just seems like this relationship between the UFC and Conor McGregor is starting to head down a path where it's getting more and more sour between these two. And I already showed the other clips where Conor McGregor's talking, this was in the previous video that I told you to go watch in the beginning of this video. He's like, I had multiple training camps and the UFC didn't give me a date and I want a date. This all comes back to the contract situation. Conor has 2 fights left. I truly believe Conor wants to fight out those 2 fights on his deal, and he wants to be able to negotiate as a free man. And I really truly believe that Francis Ngannou inspired him a bit, because Conor McGregor is going to demand much more money than somebody like Francis Ngannou. And Francis Ngannou is getting paid more than Conor McGregor by Saudi Arabia. So I'm wondering how long can they keep this charade going on, because Dana keeps throwing cold water on it. When asked about June, Dana said, oh, that's not going to happen. He probably won't fight until fall or winter. And Conor had said, I'm fighting Chandler in June, on June 29th. Then Dana shoots that down. Then he says, I want to fight Nate Diaz at the Sphere. Dana shoots that down. At what point are we going to reach the tipping point where you can tell Conor's trying not to piss Dana off? You can tell Dana's trying not to piss Conor off, which is very rare. Conor's one of the very rare mega stars in the sport that operates from a little bit of leverage even while being in a contract. And you can tell Dana doesn't want to piss Conor off. Conor doesn't want to piss Dana off. But it's starting to creep up to that point where I can see Conor taking it more public. I can see then once Conor takes it public, Dana White obviously is going to be asked about it at post-fight pressers and interviews, and then it's really going to start to get interesting. And I think this is one of the biggest stories in the sport in 2024. How does the relationship between Conor McGregor and Dana White play out? And does Conor actually get a fight? But I'm telling you right now, if I'm Michael Chandler, I wouldn't feel good about this interview. First off, he mentioned 2 opponents before me, and then almost hinted at potentially Dustin Poirier being ready first or being first. Then he finally is asked about Chandler, says Chandler's first, but he talks about Diaz, and then he says, well, the opponent doesn't matter. I just want to fight. I just want to date. And he said in the past, they're keeping me from my way of living. So this is going to be an interesting story. I'm going to keep updating it when I see more important information put out there, whether it's an interview, whether it's a post-fight press conference, whatever it may be. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.